Welcome back to the Faith to You podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Rogers, and I'm here with Pastor Caleb to finish up what we started. Mm-hmm. We started talking about what it looks like to be an elder, specifically from you, how you became an elder, why you became an elder, and then started working through some of the qualifications. Yeah. So the different qualifications mentioned in 1 Timothy chapter 3, how do you live them out?
Yeah.
And how do you look for them in other people?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And so I think the next one we're going to jump right into is just when you talk about hospitality, and when you're looking at hospitality, what does that look like for you? And how do you judge whether a potential elder is hospitable or not?
The primary thing I'm looking for is, does this person express their love of people well? In their relationships, do the people in their life feel genuinely loved by this person?
Yeah.
Because hospitality, as I shared in my sermon, it's a disposition that results in an action. And so that disposition it's just a heart of love. My grandpa, who is one of the men who discipled me, he said, you have to love people to Jesus. And so what I'm looking for first is just, there's some men who, they have a lot of love in their heart, but they don't express it well. And so does he have that love in his heart, and then does he express it well? And if it expresses well, then he's going to be a man of the people. He's going to be spending time with people. And it's not because of duty. It's not like, I need to go take my wife on a date, or I need to go and go to this person's house and help them out and interact with them. They're able to overcome whatever, introversion or shyness that they have naturally with their just deep care of people. And so when I look at hospitality, I'm looking for somebody who just really expresses their love of people well, and they show with their lifestyle that they want to be with people. They want to be around people. They want to be spending time with people.
Yeah. Okay. So that's, you just want to see, do people want to be with people?
Yeah, exactly.
Or is it a chore? Right. Is it a pain? Or is it something they even do?
Yeah.
What about, well, this might seem redundant, but how do you utilize your teaching gift? I mean, obviously, you're the senior pastor.
Yeah, so my teaching gift is, it's something that's grown over time. I recognized from a young age that God had given me the spiritual gift of teaching. I started the first Bible study I was teaching in regularly when I was a sophomore in high school, and just grabbed 4 other guys and we went through the book of James together. But every single opportunity I had to teach, I took that opportunity. And the thing with the teaching gift is, the more you utilize it, the better you get at it. You don't learn to teach just sort of sitting around and not teaching. The best way to use your teaching gift is to put yourself in every single position that you can teach. I eventually felt like God had given me not just a teaching gift, but a preaching gift. And there's a difference between the dialogue that you can have in teaching one other person or teaching a small group, and the preaching gift. And one of the differences is in teaching a smaller group, you're going to ask more questions and you're going to be able to draw people out. In preaching, there's really a lot of exhortation. And I recognized that God gave me the spiritual gift of exhortation, and that I had a passion to call people collectively to action. And so when I began to realize I had that gift as well, I pursued opportunities to preach as well. But one of the tests that God had to do in my own heart, eventually the opportunity came to become the senior pastor here at Faith Community. And I was like, great, I can preach to the whole church instead of preaching to, first I was preaching to junior hires, and then I was preaching to the college students. And I was like, this would be an opportunity for me to utilize my gift. And one of the questions I had in my own heart was, will you be faithful if it's only to 20 people? Will you be faithful if there's only, at that time, our college group was 20 to 40 people a week. Yeah. And I it was so important that I got to a point where I was willing to utilize my gift that I thought was to call, the assembled church to life in Christ. But what the Spirit really convicted me of is it doesn't matter how big your audience is. What's important is that you're faithfully using your gift with whoever is in front of you. And when you're in youth ministry, like you're serving in youth ministry right now, there'll be nights in youth group like where it's like barely anybody's there. And you could feel like, oh, like, is it worth it? I can remember nights when I was doing junior high ministry where I'd have like 10 kids show up. I'm like, man. Whoa. And the Spirit would really convict me, like, these 10 kids matter. I can remember one event I had where 2 kids showed up. Whew. And it was at my house, and I just having the kids. It was a boys' like evening, and I was gonna have them over. We were watch a movie, play some games, right? And I was like, these are the 2 guys that God wants me to invest in tonight. You know,
yep.
And that's something that the Lord really convicted me of. Like, yeah, you have this gift, and you should seek to utilize it wherever you can. But don't create an expectation for what God's going to do with that gift. Don't think, okay, well, I need to because I'm a preacher, I need to have at least an audience of 200 people.
Yeah.
No, what we see in the Gospels is that Jesus is preaching to the crowds, and he's constantly sitting down with the 12. And he's recapping, and he's like, you guys get it. And you see that that preaching to, you know, the thousands means nothing if you can't sit down with a dozen men that you have a close relationship with and really give them the sense of the word. Yeah. And so a preacher isn't somebody who's just able to electrify crowds. They're somebody who's able to sit down and talk deeply with a few people. And so with my gift, I try to use it on every single level. So it can be one-on-one biblical counseling, or it can be I'm preaching to the 500 to 1,000 people that'll show up here on a Sunday, and everything in between. And so wherever God puts me, I want to be relying on the spiritual gift of teaching to help the people that he puts in front of me.
In front of you. That's good. How do you train men to be sensible and respectable? Those are 2 virtues we look for in young men.
You know, to train men to do that, it's essential that you get out of any sort of classroom setting. Like, I can't teach that in my office.
Yeah.
Right? I need to get out into the world. This is one of the reasons that for me, I love to serve in children's ministries during the summer. You know? Like, I help out with VBS, or I'll go to Camp Faith and I'll teach there. And I serve in our youth ministry. I try to be involved in different ministries in our church, because when I'm rubbing elbows with the saints and I can see like where they're putting things into practice, then I can begin to see, oh, like, you know what, you're not actually being sensible right here. And what that means is that they're allowing their emotions to get the best of them.
Yep.
And so when I see that, I'll come gently alongside that person and I'll ask them questions. When I'm walking in the Spirit, I'll ask them questions, right? And it's so important that I make that distinction when I'm interacting with them, because if I come to them and I begin to lecture them, like, hey, you're out of control, you need to get yourself under control, and like, you're totally being like controlled by your emotions right now, and like that doesn't help them. And so I need to come alongside them, and I need to ask them questions to draw them out. And really, if they can self-assess and they can realize, like, oh, you know what, I shouldn't have said that. That was inappropriate. Usually, they also know what they need to do. And so growing in sensibleness results from having those discipleship relationships where I'm rubbing elbows with the saints, and then having those questions where I ask them questions, and they usually can self-assess and realize what they need to do. And if they don't, sometimes what I'll do is I'll take them to a passage, and I'll say, like, are you putting this into practice? And if they say no, then I can ask them, well, how could you? What are things that you could do? And sometimes they'll say, I don't know. You know, and then I'll usually ask some more questions. And sometimes they'll say, well, I think I could do it this way, but do you have any advice? Like, what do you think?
What do you think?
And so now they've opened the door and they're asking me for counsel instead of like coming and giving them unsolicited advice. So it's so important that we're training people to be sensible through the life-on-life discipleship, and using questions and using scripture in that training.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really good for any of us that seek to disciple men, is to live life with them and then help them be sensible and make sure we're being sensible and respectable as well. Yeah. What about managing your household? How do you do that?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that God's really convicted me of in managing my household is I can't see that as a job that I can give away. I think a lot of times men think of it like, oh, my wife manages the household and I go and I manage the bacon, right? Like I bring home the bacon, I bring home the money, and then like whatever happens in the house, you're in charge of it. So you really have to overcome your domestic hesitations. And so for me, what that means is like there's no job in our home that's beneath me. Right? It's not like, oh, that's woman's work. So that's a cultural misnomer that we have, that there's things in the home that fathers are not to do. Anything in the home that needs to be done, you can do that. You can take responsibility for that and you can get those things done. And so managing the household happens, first of all, by modeling service in the home. And so I need to be doing that. I need to be taking care of things in my own home as the leader for my family. But then I need to, I can't be there all the time. And my wife is given to me as a helper in managing the household. So I need to communicate to her clearly goals and expectations that I have for our home, and then see if we land on the same page. And so when I'm doing that, when I'm dialoguing with my wife about like, here's goals, sometimes she'll let me know that's an impossible goal. Like, that can't work. Like for our family, we can't put that into practice. And so then I'll get feedback from her on what will work, and we'll come to a conclusion together. And a lot of that has to happen because I'm away from the home when I'm ministering, when I'm here at the church. She's going to need to put those things into practice while I'm gone. And so that's a complementary relationship. That we're working together in our managing of the household. With my children, one of the most important character qualities for me to put in practice is that I have clear expectations and consequences and follow through. So I don't just like get really frustrated because my kids aren't getting their schoolwork done, or get really frustrated because they're not picking up after themselves. Yeah. Like this is the expectation of what we do as Schroeders in our home, and you're not doing it, and this is what the consequence is, and so I'm going to follow through with that consequence. And so it's so important that I'm not doing ad hoc parenting, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, now I'm really frustrated and I'm going to get angry and I'm going to discipline you. Yep. And that's exactly what fathers are told not to do. It says don't exasperate your children. I'm exasperating my children if I'm doing ad hoc parenting. Where it's just like, okay, now I'm frustrated, and so now I'm going to make some like draconian rule for the whole home, right? And I'm not perfect at that. There are times where I slip into that, and my wife will lovingly let me know, like, hey, like you need to like make sure you're communicating the expectations and the consequences instead of just coming up with some crazy consequence and the kids don't even know that they were breaking a rule, that those are clearly communicated. So these are my expectations, these are the consequences, and then I consistently follow through. You could have expectations and consequences, but then you never follow through. And then when you suddenly do, it exasperates your kids because you always let us get away with this. Yeah. What's going on? Yeah. And so all of those things are so important for an elder to have, because guess what? When I came here and I was the senior pastor, I have to have the same thing. I have to have clear expectations, I have to have clear consequences, and I have to have consistent follow through. Yeah. Otherwise, I can't manage the household of God. Yep.
Wow. So how you manage a house translate into how you manage God's house.
Exactly.
And if you can't do the main one God's given you, how can you do God's house as well? That's awesome. And then how do you measure a potential elder's reputation outside the church? So looking at an elder and well spoken of by outsiders, how do you see that?
Yeah. A lot of it can only happen if you have opportunities to observe that person outside of your church space. And so I've actually only, so far as an elder and now as a senior pastor, I've only gone through that process with people I know really well. And I've gone through that process with people that I've actually interacted with in non-work spaces. So let me give you an example. Steve Smith is somebody I've known since I was a child. Steve Smith and I ran the LA Marathon together when I was 17. And he's somebody that I was in his home constantly growing up. His sons were sort of friends with my younger brothers, and so I sort of could get like looped in. And so I'd see him outside of ministry context. I would see him outside of like, this is my church face, right? I got to see him out in the world, interacting with people in the world, and I got to see how he conducted himself. And so it's so important to do that. One of the things that I would do if I had a candidate that I didn't know well, is I would actually ask if I could speak to people that they work with. So I would want to talk to people that are in the workspace with them, and just ask them some questions about their character. You know, something that that I think is really important is that you're spending time with men who are potential elders outside of ministry context. So I try to find opportunities to be in their home, to be interacting with them in the real world, so I can see how they interact in the world that surrounds them. But having some references from their workspace, even this, you can see some of the honors and accolades that they get in the secular world. Right, so the promotions that they're getting, the awards that they get in whatever vocation that they're fulfilling, those sort of like communicate to us. Okay, like people think highly of this person in their vocation. They're being recognized for what they're doing, and so those let us know. Okay, this is somebody who's looked up to out in the world as well.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, again, being an elder is not an easy task, and there's a lot of growth and maturity that needs to happen, and needs to be visible to not just believers but also unbelievers, that they are a person that's different, that's grown, and that is a man of God. And that bears testimony then to the people he's shepherding and to unbelievers who are looking at him. So thank you guys once again for watching the Faith to You podcast, and God bless.